just squeezed us in here.
Feel it. Oh, is that it? All right.
Right. It is my honor to welcome you all to the Dole Institute this evening. My name is Clarissa Unger, and I'm the Development Coordinator here at the Dole Institute. We have a very special program for you tonight, and I am so excited, to see so many people here this evening. I do want to just point out a couple people here. Provost Jeffrey Vitter is here with us this evening. Thank you. And also our Associate Director, Barbara Ballard, is here with us tonight as well. And I also want to point out our Senior Archivist, Audrey Coleman, will be kind of running the show for us this evening. So thank you all for coming. We will have an opportunity for question and answer at the end of the main panel discussion here this evening. So please wait for a mic to come to you. Since we are recording it, we want to make sure that we get everyone spoken up on the mic. So just wait for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Tyler with the Alumni Association.
Thank you, Clarissa. As she said, my name is Tyler Rockers. I'm the chapter coordinator for the KU Alumni Association, and I promise I'll be very brief, so I know you don't want to hear from me too much. I do just want to take a second to thank all of our members here in attendance tonight, particularly our Jayhawks Society, Life, and President's Club members. None of this would be possible without you guys, and we're very happy to have this partnership with the Dole Institute, so thank you very much. Audrey?
Okay, great. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Clarissa. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. How many of you have been to the Dole Institute before? All right. So you're probably familiar with our wonderful slate of public programmings that we do, and are familiar with our mission, which is to promote bipartisan discussion and civil leadership and engagement in the political system to promote change and solutions for the good. So that is an ongoing slate of activities that is always happening here at the Institute, and you're all familiar with that. I am the Senior Archivist. Again, my name is Audrey Coleman, and I oversee the library, the research library portion of the Institute. And so it's been, you all are kind of being experimented on, because I'm going to do some live research here with you. And kind of give you a sense of what it is and what we have in our collection and how it might be used. And that's not to say that I'm going to be doing academic research, and that's part of the beauty of it for me, is that while our collection is very much a collection of the working papers of Senator Dole, and also a wonderful resource for anyone who is interested in learning about the ongoing workings of our government and doing long-term, high-level academic research. There's also a thread of community there, and so that's something that, as a Kansan, is very exciting for me. You know, the senator has represented our state for several decades, and the communities and the individuals that he has touched and has represented is very much alive in our archives. I like to say, you know, the voices are there, the people are there, and that's really what I wanted to share with you this evening. And I think this will be a great illustration of how the Dole Archives represents the community, and in this case, the KU community. So I thank you for our panelists. Let me just quickly introduce them before we get started into using this apparatus here, which I think looks kind of, you know, it's actually pretty lo-fi, but I think it looks like a neat setup. So Larry Meeker, KU alum, Bob Miner, Keith Wood, and Elizabeth Schmidt, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll get to hear more from them and kind of watch as the story unfolds, and you'll get a sense of why these folks are here. So I'm going to step behind the table, and you'll want to turn most of your attention, I think, to the screen here. That one, the details that you can't see quite as well. But if you can't see anything that I'm showing you, don't worry. If you like us on Facebook, we'll do some follow-up this week, and we'll show you, we'll put the documents and things that I'm showing you up on the web. So let's go ahead and get started. Step back here. So Keith, let me, if I may, you know, Keith Wood is really he's the instigator, or I say inspiration for this panel. Kind of pulling back the curtain, which is what Archives is. We had talks with the Alumni Association. We said, okay, you know, let's do a program about, you know, at the Institute, about the Archives, about Bob Dole. How about Bob Dole and KU? That's a good place to start, but you know, that's a big topic. How do you fill a few minutes of time with that? So, and this is when Keith makes an offhand comment that brings us all here today? What was it, Keith?
Well, very simply, Tyler and I were meeting with Clarissa and Audrey and kicking around ideas. What could we do to help the Alumni Association participate in the 10th anniversary of the Institute? And offhand, somewhere out of the ether, I pulled this thing up and I said, well, you know, there's lots of people who've had interactions, and Bob's had a lot of contact with the campus over the years, and I really remember, and very vividly remembered, how I first met Bob Dole. And it was standing on the sidewalk in front of Flint Hall by the old kiosk that was there, and this gentleman right here, Bob Miner, was his escort, I guess you could say, and he was introducing Bob to passersby. Well, I was involved with the Collegiate Young Republicans, and I knew he was going to be there, and my future wife and I came by, got introduced, and somewhere in my mind said, this guy's going places. I mean, it stuck that hard that I remember that incident so well. And I told Audrey about it, and she said, I wonder if that's in the archives. Well, it was. Not me specifically, but the other three who were up here. And so that offhand comment about, let's go back and find out how early we can find some of these connections, and Audrey jumped on it, and we're here tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. I thought initially I would prepare a PowerPoint, do screenshots of documents and things like that, but it occurred to me, I'm an archivist. I like paper and real things. We're here at the Institute. Why not show you? Why not give you, I'm going to show you these documents, why not give you some kind of a sense of the experience of doing research, and maybe you'll come back and do some on your own, or call us. And with your own questions. So let's just get started here. So I've got some data, called data. Keith says, so this happened, he was at the information booth, and it was September 1966.
Something like that.
Something
I knew
like
it was in the fall. I thought election year would make sense. Why else would Bob be out there shaking hands, you know? And it was a starting point.
Right. So it's a starting point, and it's straightforward, right? You know, I know my own collection. I can kind of get a sense of where to look. We've got appointment logs from the senators, then Congressman Dole's offices. We've got press releases. September 1966. Went in there, not a thing. You know, nothing 66, you know, give or take. You know, when you do archival research, you have a sense of where you're going, and you get in there, and you may find what you're looking for, and a lot of times you don't, and we didn't. And so it was kind of like, well, I tabled that idea and thought for a couple more weeks. And then I waited for a brainstorm. I thought, you know, I'm going to do this last, I'm going to do a quick scan of our clippings files. So I'm going to show you what a clippings file looks like. This is, so these are our archival boxes. We have about 1,700 linear feet of processed, that is cataloged, accessible papers of the senator. This is a linear foot, so 1,700 of these. We've got catalog records, so that's good. So I'll show you the bad news of this. Clippings from the 66 era. We've got 5 files of these, and I'm going to pull out this file. Hopefully you can see what this looks like. All right, so you know, I've got a job. I do have other things to do with my time other than prepare for this presentation. This is the short version, because you know this is all rigged, of course. So you know, clippings file. Okay, this is a clippings file, Dole related, 1963 to 1966. Don't get too caught up in what the things actually say. Just look at the stack of stuff, and we'll just kind of go through. You know, when we're using archival collections, we go very maintain the order that it's in, and I'm seeing a lot of 66. This is nominally a chronological file, but heck, it doesn't look too much like things are in a lot of order. So I'm down in our stack saying, okay, if this is going to work, this is you know, I'm just gonna give it a try. Just gonna give it a try. Page through here, page through here, and it really is just you know, if you're like me, if you're into history or if you're into Kansas, you can just get a sense of what is going on in the world in the 60s. Using this collection, here's you know, for some reason these clippings were bundled, really small ones. I'll just skip over that for now. This is you know, Dorothy Malone, hospitalized, resuming her starring role in television's Peyton Place series, so that's important. So, you know, I don't know why I opened this envelope. I'm trying to build some suspense here, people. I hope you're feeling suspense. Pull others out. Saying, okay, man, look at this, and I'm going to separate this out. This is a pile, tiny little clippings. Wheat surplus, Girl State, Salina Journal, 67. Okay, Great Bend. There you go. Bob, Great Bend native. And then, for some reason, I saw, you might be able to see this here, Lawrence Journal World, a little tag here. Lawrence Journal World, okay. Open it up. Well, there's Congressman Dole. Unfold it. Congressman visits campus. U.S. Rep from Russell visited Kansas University campus and met KU students during between-class breaks at the information booth at Jayhawk Boulevard. So, and here we go.
I wasn't crazy.
Wrong year.
Wrong year.
I don't want to rib him too high. I know it's not a mistake. I was heckling him. I'm like, well, you know, Keith, it wasn't September 1966. It was November 1st, 1965. But you might recognize some of these folks up here on our panel. So here we have Liz Schmidt, Bob Miner, and Larry Meeker here. Pretty darn cool. So the puzzle's starting to fit in. Now we have a date. Now we kind of have the key that will unlock the rest of our, kind of lead us to the rest of the material. Find out what the story was, what was going on with this visit to KU, November 1st, 1965. So I'm going to clean up here. You're going to watch me do some things. And we have a press release collection in our archive. So the senator, obviously released a lot of press releases over the course of his career, and it is really a fabulous tool that we use a lot in order to gain inroads into our collection. And that is actually one of the sets of material that we do have digitized online. Almost entirely, we're working on completing that, but it's just really fabulous. So, let's see, November 65. I'm going to have to go to October. Again, I'm cutting corners, but so press releases, lots of stuff from Congress of the United States, House of Representatives, things released from Washington. Now, remember, we're looking for November 1st, 1965. If I were going to do this more accurately, I would go to the November file and say, we don't really have anything for November 1st because, what is the nature of a press release? It's announcing something that may come, it's either recapping or announcing something. And in this case, it's announcing something. This piece of this document doesn't have a header on it. Released through the Hutchinson office. October 26, 1965, Congressman Bob Dole has announced a tour of several Kansas colleges and universities. He will begin by visiting his University of Kansas campus Monday, November 1st. He'll go on to Washburn, Fort Hays, Kansas Wesleyan, and Marymount in Salina. Meeting young people is always a challenge, Dole said in announcing the tour, and I'm anxious to hear their comments on anything from Appalachia to Vietnam. Dole will begin a tour of the district on November 10th before leaving for Rome on November 20th. So just that piece, Appalachia to Vietnam, you're just immersed in the world and what's going on. Vietnam is something that most people are familiar with. What's the Appalachia reference? Anybody? 1965?
War on poverty.
War on poverty legislation introduced by LBJ in early 1964. So, again, the language is so evocative of the time. And after he's done with this, he's going to go to Rome. So I couldn't resist, Senator Dole in Rome. We're going to do a little aside because every treasure hunt kind of like wends you around. So I'll just pull out one of these photographs of the senator and his trip to Rome after his campus tour. And these are just too fun and interesting not to share. And I'll try to slow down here. So the Kansas wheat, not Kansas wheat, Italian wheat. But, the graphics are just incredible. So he was let me look at my notes here. He's with a woman named Dorothy Jacobson at an FAO conference in Rome, Italy, and it's affiliated with the United Nations. And the lighting is a little harsh there. But, you're kind of getting a sense of what he's doing. And he's already a leader on the world stage going to Italy, representing the United States. And it makes me wonder if this might be, he was wounded in Italy in 1945, almost mortally so. And so it makes me wonder, with some further research, maybe that might be his first, imagine if that were his first trip back to Italy and what kinds of emotions that might evoke him. Again, that's a topic for further research. So this is where it gets really fun, and this is where, I really get inspired here. So this is a file with its public appearances, Kansas trips, 1965. You can see that little label there. There are actually several files that are labeled like this, so you're not really sure what you're not sure what you're going to get when you use an archival collection. So you just kind of open your mind, start paging through here, and I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm not sure what I'm going to find, but here we are. A letter dated April 6, 1966. Not what I thought I would find, but it's ultimately really fills in our story. And I'm going to widen this out a little bit. Again, I'll read a couple of little important passages. But this is on letterhead for the National Republican Congressional Committee. It's a Dear Colleague letter from the chairman. And it's talking about how Bob Dole of Kansas has developed what I consider to be one of the most effective techniques for reaching young people in his district through visits through college campuses. Don Rumsfeld of Illinois, a frequent speaker on college campuses, yes, that Don Rumsfeld, he was a congressman from Illinois at the time, is espousing, is touting Bob Dole's approach. He's doing boots on the ground, like social media style outreach with the youth of Kansas, going to campuses, and obviously setting, this makes news for the Republican National Congressional Committee. He's setting an example, and that's pretty darn neat. Here is a letter, Visit Your Colleges, by Congressman Bob Dole. He recommends that the first step you might take is to contact the chairman of the Collegiate Young Republicans, who was Bob Miner, sitting over there here at the time. He's suggesting that here he states that the campus schedule depends mostly on the person making the arrangements. My schedules were generally well planned and organized, the classic being the one at the University of Kansas. I do not recommend such a strenuous schedule unless you are in good shape and have your track shoes. A copy of the schedule is attached. And then skipping down, and the last point that he might make, stay in contact with the younger generation. Their opinions, their ideas are important to you, to me, and the Republican Party. So again, Bob Dole's method of outreach. Turn the page, and here is his sample schedule that he followed for that day, November 1st, 1965. And we can see that he's meeting with the CYR, the Collegiate Young Republicans group. Several entries here for, during passing periods, he's at the information booth, so the picture starts to fill in. He's meeting with political science courses. He visits the Kappa Sig house, breakfast in the prayer room at the Kansas Union. So he's hitting all the highlights. And seeing this was really inspiring to me as a staff person at the Dole Institute, because it is so much the model of what we do for a lot of our speakers and our study groups here at the Institute. Not only do we have them speak here, but we get them out around campus, visiting with students, visiting classes, and really touching them in very small settings to try to get them in contact. So that's sort of like neat to see that model there. And here is some press that the senator got for this tour.
Audrey?
Yes.
On the schedule there are a number of names that folks might remember from campus.
Good point. So
Dr.
appointment,
McCoy
he's
from
meeting
Michigan.
with Vice Chancellor James R. Surface in Strong Hall, Dr. Sandelius in Blake, Political Science 50, Political Science 55, Dr. Grum, Political Science 2, Dr. Mullen in Blake, lunch at the Faculty Club with Dr. McCoy and Professor Wilson. Let's see, some other folks in the Political Science Department, Dr. Grum again, Dr. Ethan Allen, Chairman of Political Science Department and Director of Governmental Research Center, Dr. Lugin in Political Science, Dean Agee, and then a VIP program at the end of the day sponsored by the Association of University Residence Halls. And I believe that we have evidence that took place at McCollum Hall. And so that's how we closed out the day. Now so for me as an archivist, it's like we would not have this story, we would not know this information if we didn't see these humble little office papers really telling us about what happened that day. Keith would have had the recollection and it would all be gone, but it's just so exciting to be able to fill in all the details. I'm getting breathy, but here, this is an internal, this is the last document I'll show before turning it over to our panelists, but this is a schedule for the college tour. And this is an internal Dole folks document, working documents, and there's several copies of this within this file. So let me tell you about how Senator Dole's visit to Kansas City started out, and this will just, I think, be pretty illuminating for anyone who's been around Kansas City and get a sense of how neat this is. So Bob Miner is picking up Dole at 10 o'clock at the Airport Holiday Inn, and then Dole and Miner are going to the Kansas City Club for brunch at the invitation of Lamar Hunt. And then they're going to a football game at the invitation of Lamar Hunt. And seeing that, being from the Kansas City area, I said, okay, this is a kid, he's in college, picking up the congressman at the airport, going to the Kansas City Club, toasting water glasses, I'm sure, with Lamar Hunt. And, so what is this guy's story? Where is he? What is he doing? And for that matter, not only him, but all of the other students who were involved in this visit. And so we started with the folks who were in the photo, and we sent letters kind of out of the blue saying, here's an experiment, we're learning about this, would you send us your recollections? And some folks sent more than their recollections. They came from far and wide. And so that's where I'll kind of do a segue, I guess, and turn it over to our folks, because they really complete the piece, the archives. It talks about history. It documents an event that is now several decades in the past, but the history is alive and well here. So I don't know, guys. How do you? Let's start with. Why don't you all introduce yourself and talk a little bit about pick one thing you want to say about that day, and then we'll kind of talk. Larry.
Well, I'll start off.
Like I said, this is an experiment. And also, in my defense, I'm an archivist and not a talk show host, so I'll do my best to moderate the panel.
Well, I was a junior in the engineering school and mechanical engineering at KU at that time, but I was actively involved in politics and certainly part of the Young Republicans and knew of Dole very well. That's basically what of that particular day, that's a specific memory. When Audrey contacted me, and she wrote the letter, and I suspect wrote the letter to all of us, I kept it for a while thinking about, shall I email back and send her a comment on it? And finally I decided to call her, and I said, Audrey, I want to know more about this day you're planning here. And she said, kind of gave the background, the Alumni Association and all that. And finally I said, well, are you looking for things that just totally support Bob Dole, or are you looking to round out a picture? I mean, where are you on this? She said, we want all sides of the story. And I said, well, the bottom line for me was this was a period of time that was ultimately the making of a Democrat. And so that was kind of my entree into that, and that's
And I said, perfect, we're dedicated to bipartisan conversation.
That's right. And I can tell you about that later, but that's sort of what brought me together and focused on this particular day, because there were incidents related to Bob Dole. My father was in politics. He was in the Kansas State Legislature, Republican from 1962 to 68. So I was steeped in politics and thinking about the issues that politics brings forward.
Okay.
Me next?
Go ahead, Bob.
You next.
I remember your dad at least as much as you, Larry,
Yeah,
from
that's
those
good.
days.
Well, you would, you should.
I had the privilege of working in a number of Bob Dole's campaigns. So when this event came up, and I was chairman of the College Republicans, it was a nice fit, and I just kind of slipped into campaign mode as far as organizing these activities during the day. And having experienced campaign mode with Bob Dole, I knew that we would want to take advantage of every minute of the day and every second and every minute, not waste any time whatsoever. See as many people as possible, talk to as many people as possible, do as much as possible, and that's what we tried to do. If I'm going to pick one thing, I might start with the day before, and even as a prelude to that, you mentioned the trip to Italy. This is a little off base, but I thought the next thing you were going to pull out was a press release on his air flight to Italy. Did you come across that?
No, I missed it completely.
Well, he was named by Lyndon Johnson as a U.S. representative to this agriculture meeting in Italy. And it was his first such overseas trip as a member of Congress. And he was provided with a ticket. It was a first-class ticket. So we're all excited. The boss is going to Italy, going to fly first class and meet with all these world leaders. And he looks at it and he says, first class, that must have been expensive. And he ordered us to return the ticket, exchange it for tourist class, and to refund the difference to the U.S. Treasury, which we did in due course. And I may be mistaken about whether there was a release on that. It kind of half sticks in my mind. And, took credit for saving the taxpayers a few dollars through his frugality. But just a comment or two on the day before when he flew in, the first thing he said to me was complaining about the noise at the hotel the night before. There had Saturday before, Nebraska had played at Missouri. I don't know who won or who lost, but I think a lot of the Nebraska folks stopped midway home in Kansas City and partied all night at that Holiday Inn. So poor Congressman Dole, who arrived on a flight from Washington late Saturday night, could hardly get any sleep before he was off on a rather hectic schedule for the next week, touring college campuses in the state of Kansas. But we did have an invitation from Lamar Hunt to attend a Chiefs game against the Oakland Raiders. There was a brunch at the Kansas City Club, which is not such a shabby place. I rather enjoyed that. We drove down there and parked there, and brunch was maybe a couple of hours. There were probably about 20 people. It was a long table, and it was evidently an effort by Lamar Hunt to engage some of the policy leaders from Kansas and Missouri and just show some hospitality, create some good relations. So in addition to Congressman Dole, who wasn't from the Kansas City area, he was from western Kansas, but he was invited. Let's see, Congressman Chet Mize from Kansas 2nd District was there. Senator Jim Pearson was there. Senator Stuart Symington from Missouri was there. Congressman Richard Bowling from Missouri was there. And several city council members from the Missouri side, probably from the Kansas side as well, maybe some Johnson County leaders. Group of about 20 people. There were a couple of spouses. I think Chet Mize had his wife. I think I was the only staff person along. But it was a nice brunch. And then we, somewhat in contrast, we got into a rather, it just wasn't as upscale as the Kansas City Club. We got into this city bus that was leased or chartered to bounce along to the stadium. And it was in the old municipal stadium, so there are no fancy skyboxes or anything. We're just sitting out in the open. But we did have very good seats somehow. And the outcome of the game, I had a recollection that the Chiefs lost, and I've always rooted against the Raiders ever since. But I did a little checking on that date to see if that was the date this particular week that they played, and they did play, and the Chiefs won narrowly. So I don't have such a grudge against the Raiders after all.
You were swept up in the moment.
So that was kind of the prep, the lead-in to the day on the campus in Lawrence, which obviously had to have been fairly well planned before that Sunday. Else, I was not available to pick up last-minute details. Though we did have a very active college Republican group that year, a lot of actively engaged individuals, and so I can't take sole credit for organizing the day here at Lawrence, but we did have a very full and interesting day.
Oh, me
Skip.
next?
Either one. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Liz. We've already heard from Keith. Let's go to Liz.
Sure. I've already had my-
All
I
right.
can go.
I'm from Illinois, and I graduated from KU in 1968. I always loved politics, and in high school. About 4 weeks ago, I received that photograph and a letter, and the envelope Bob Dole Institute of Politics, and I said, why is Bob Dole writing me? And and my neighbor was next to me and opened up the letter, and I said, oh my gosh, I don't even remember that dress. Anyway, the first time I met Bob Dole, freshman, I walked into the Republican headquarters here in Lawrence and thought I was going to stuff some envelopes, do some mailings, and I don't remember the gentleman, but he came up to me and he said, do you have a driver's license? And I said, yes. All right, he said, you're going to drive these two gentlemen around Douglas County, Barry Goldwater Jr. and Bob Dole. And I said, who's Bob Dole? Donald Rumsfeld was my congressman, 13th Congressional District, so I wasn't familiar at all with Kansas politics. And so for several hours, I remember the congressman told me which way to go, turn left this way, and we'd jump out at a certain spot and shake hands, and I'd hand out materials, and we'd jump back into the car again, and so on and so forth. So that was my first introduction to Bob Dole, and we sort of kept in contact from that point on. Great fun that day. Barry Goldwater Jr. was very good looking. So I didn't have any pictures from that day, but I do have a picture with Barry Goldwater Jr. And from that point on, I just have found the congressman is an individual who is very compassionate. And every time I would see him, he would say, Elizabeth, so when are you moving back to Kansas? Every time. And I'd say, oh, I'm in Wisconsin, I'm in Chicago, and I'm in Florida. And you're in Florida, and come back to Kansas. So I have not been back here for 46 years since I've graduated. And I'm so grateful to Audrey for sending this unbelievable newspaper article at 7 cents a copy, remember, back then?
That's right.
Probably.
And the letter.
Yep.
Yeah, so I have wonderful memories of the congressman and the senator. The day that Nixon resigned, I was working for the chairman of the board of an investment banking firm in Chicago. And then we didn't have overnight mail. So he said, Elizabeth, you've got to take this prospectus. It was a bond house underwriting. You've got to take this prospectus to Washington, D.C. to get it filed with the SEC. I said, oh, sure. Of course, the minute I did, dropped it off the next day, I raced to the senator's office, and I said to the receptionist, would you mind, is the senator in, would you mind saying that Elizabeth Schmidt? And all of a sudden, the back door flew open down the hallway, and Elizabeth! And I said, Senator. And he said, and when are you moving back to Kansas? So on several occasions, when we've seen each other or spoken to each other, he usually has that comment.
Are there any other, now that everyone's had a chance to talk, is there anything else you'd like to talk about campus life during that time, or your experience being involved as a student, getting involved in politics, not necessarily related to then Congressman Dole, or,
Well, I was going to say that Mr. Minor here was the one that came up with the Dole. Every time we went to a town meeting and the congressman was in, he had the Dole cans of pineapple piled up in a pyramid at your town meetings and so forth. We went to his office several times in Washington, D.C., and just a very hospitable, typical Kansan individual.
I need to defend myself.
Was that you?
I believe that the Dole pineapple juice parties originated in 1960, which was his first congressional
Oh,
race, which
okay.
was the one I did not participate in. I started in '62. However, I became a very prolific consumer of Dole pineapple juice. Have been seen darting in and out of many, many grocery stores around the state of Kansas, filling up carts with cans of Dole pineapple juice.
Of course, he won't tell you that he also owns stock in the company.
I wish I had done so.
There you go.
Would have been good.
But we were recalling at lunch the origination of that name association. Maybe old hat familiar to everyone here, but in the '60 campaign, it was a three-way Republican primary, the candidates being Keith Sebelius, the favored candidate probably because he had run and almost won that nomination 2 years earlier. The second candidate being Bob Dole, the Russell County attorney, 4 terms, and the third being a state senator from Beloit, Kansas, by the name of Phil Doyle, D-O-Y-L-E. So they quickly came to figure that using the familiarity of the Dole pineapple brand name was going to be helpful, and so they started using that in the campaign. I also recall in '63 and for a few years thereafter, there was a congressman from California serving who shared, had an office also in the Cannon House office building where Bob Dole's office was housed, just down the hallway. And forget his first name, but his last name was D-O-Y-L-E. And invariably, we would occasionally get mail addressed to Congressman Bob Doyle. And oftentimes, those letters would get referred down the hallway first for opening. And they would eventually find their way back. We knew who they were intended for, but a lot of people knew the name and didn't get it quite right for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how there's always these connections to politics. You bumped into it along the way and wound up staying involved. And I kind of went the other direction. I got involved very early. My next door neighbor, as a grade school, high school guy, was campaign chairman for Joe Skubitz, who was the congressman from southeast Kansas. I see some nodding heads, so some folks know that name. And we also knew the Sheppels. So I cut my teeth as literally a grade school or junior high kid, stuffing envelopes for campaigns, kind of like, going around. And so it was very natural coming to school to say, oh, gee, what can I get involved in? And hung around with the Young Republicans for a little while, but then you mentioned something else. I wound up being very involved with the Association of University Residence Halls, the AURH, got involved in their leadership. And so there's only so much time. You've got studying, and you've got a girlfriend who's really important to you, and so I wound up being less involved in politics, but never left it. As soon as I was old enough, we had to be 21 then, I became a precinct committeeman, worked on campaigns, helped getting out the vote, and it's still around. I work as a poll worker when the elections come around. It's an important part of our political process that we get steeped in, and things like bumping into a Bob Dole and helps reinforce and solidify that. So it becomes a lifelong commitment to many of these things.
That's so much, again, part of what we promote here at the Dole Institute, civic engagement and getting involved in the process. So it's really neat to hear how this happened so many decades ago and see how we're doing it with the students who come in our student advisory board who are involved here at the Institute. And it's great to promote that legacy here. Anything else you all would like to share with us before we open it up to questions?
Well, I think to follow on with you, once politics is in your blood, you're kind of there. You're always attuned to what's going on. Mm-hmm. My involvement came through my father, who was in the state legislature from 1962 to 68. And when he was elected, and he was a Republican, and when he was elected, he was also president of the Kansas Wheat Growers Association and the National Wheat Growers Association. And of course, Bob Dole, coming from our congressman in the big first district, we produced a lot of wheat. And if you recall, in those times, our bins were overflowing with surpluses of wheat. And my father was very interested in exporting this wheat to wherever we could export it, and felt it was also a potentially good foreign policy tool. So in 1963, we sold wheat to the Russians, and it was the height of the Cold War. Bob Dole at that time was very opposed to dealing with the Russians on any front. And so, as all politicians do in keeping in touch with their constituents, he would send these radio tapes to be played on the radio stations out to the across the big first district every week. And so one week comes up and Bob Dole says, well, I told you so. We should never have sold any wheat to the Russians. They didn't pay us. We basically gave food to the enemy. My dad thought we had been paid. And so he contacted Continental and Cargill Grain and AP and UPI Wire Services. And all four sources confirmed that we had been paid in full, in gold, through a British bank within 24 hours of delivery. So he goes back to his fellow Republican, Bob Dole, and says, Bob, you know, you and I may disagree on whether we should trade with the Russians, but at least the public needs to know what happened. And Bob refused to withdraw it or correct it. He took the tape to Secretary of Agriculture Freeman at the time in Washington, and there were numerous statements that were contrary to fact. And my father always was one to say, well, we all need the common base of facts, and we can go from there. And so as president of the National Wheat Growers Association, he clarified the record. And in that following election, Bob Dole had a very tight race, and that was one of the factors that almost defeated him. When my dad was in the state legislature as his first term, he was on the Ways and Means Committee. But he had at that point violated the 11th commandment of the Republican Party, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican, period. And so they tried to get him defeated in the primary, but that didn't work. And the Democrats had become happy with him at that point, I think. And his big committee assignment in his second term in the Kansas legislature was county lines and county seats. And back in 1966 to 68, then, he was reelected, and he was put back on the Ways and Means Committee. When Bob decided to run for the U.S. Senate, my father approached a number of Republicans around the big first district, including Cliff Hope Jr. There were a number of people who were prominent and thought they would represent agriculture well in Washington. And none of them would run, so finally my dad decided he would throw his hat in the ring. And he started out in the Republican primary, but when he discovered that his literature no longer remained in the Republican offices as he left them, he decided to call Bob Docking one day, and he said, Bob, how would you like a new Democrat? And Bob said, George, you've always been too honest to be a Republican. And so I think in some sense there was this, politics is genetic. All that said, I mean, that's one instance and one piece. I mean, you look at Governor Christie today, issues are playing out, but there are many, many facets to politics. It's a very pragmatic piece of business, I think. And I wished we had more Bob Doles in Congress and the Senate today, because he was a man who could carry a philosophical point of view and do it well. But when the time came to act in behalf of the people, he could reach across the aisle and look for that common ground, and I think fundamentally had a belief that collectively we can make better decisions than any one of us can individually. And that's the essence of good governance. And I think that's the kind of thing that we still need today. And I think Bob might even struggle to be in some parts of the Republican Party today.
Larry, that was demonstrated beautifully a few years ago when he and Bill Clinton came and spoke at the Allen Fieldhouse. I think a number of you probably were there. And he stressed the difference between today's politics and the era when he was majority leader. What do you used to call it, majority pleader?
That's right.
Please do this, yeah. But the ability to compromise was the essence of getting something done in government, and he was really lamenting that today we can't do that, or they don't.
It's become much more difficult.
Yes.
Well, what I think is marvelous about, and certainly due to Bob Miner's leadership, was the accessibility of Congressman Dole and then Senator Dole. And I teach 7th grade civics and economics, and I'm trying to teach my students the accessibility of these politicians, of these elected officials. And I think that sort of, in my first encounter, was ingrained, and so you tend to stay within the political realm. I ended up, I took a Russian history course here. My major was history. And my last exam was Russian history. And because of all the involvement in the Collegiate Young Republicans, I had an interview. Dr. Ellison said, well, where are you off to next, Elizabeth? And I said, I'm off to Tucson, Arizona for an interview with John Birch for Senator Goldwater's campaign. And he said, well, nothing like going from one extreme to the other. But I think because of Bob Miner's involvement and the accessibility of the senator and his real compassion kept us going, kept my interest going. I ended up as director of volunteers for Nixon in Illinois in 1968, then met the president's brother, and he invited me it was at the Miami convention to come to work for New York, so I did. John Mitchell and Murray Chotiner and Ron Ziegler and a few others who all went to jail. But I think for our youth to get involved in politics, and it's wonderful to see, and certainly, where's Clarissa? There she is. Her involvement and so forth and what she did this last election really opens up the door. Again, our elected officials are accessible if we make the effort. And even though in my classroom it is not a democracy, I try to explain to my students how important it is to get to know your officials and to get to know how our government works. So again, I think just the base with Bob Miner and the Collegiate Young Republicans, I became well, I think it was, you showed this brochure, Region 7, and then I was co-chairman of the Midwest Collegiate Young Republicans. And I'd be calling my mother from Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa. Finally, she said, "Are you going to class, Elizabeth?" I mean, I love the idea that you're involved in politics, but, are you going to pass everything? So I did. But I'm just so delighted to be here. This is just marvelous. It's just wonderful.
Thank you, Bob. Go ahead.
We need to move along. I was thinking, though, of other Dole visits to KU, if we have time
Yes.
for maybe one more story. Not in 65. Had a hard time recalling, really, too many. But I recall one in 1976 when he had been nominated on the ticket with Gerald Ford to run for Vice President of the United States. So he was running a national campaign. During that campaign, he was given one day off. And it was a Saturday. After Friday night, he'd had a little activity going on down in Houston, Texas, which happened to be the first ever vice presidential debate. He and Walter Mondale debated that Friday evening, and there was probably a little bit of debate prep involved in the days leading up to that. But they said, "Okay, Senator, you can have one day off that Saturday, and then we want you back on the campaign trail come Sunday." Well, he said, "Okay, I'll take it easy, but I want to schedule in just a few things." So he started out in Houston, Texas, flew to Wichita. And Wichita, he had told Garner Shriver, the Republican congressman running for his, I forget what term. I think they were both elected freshmen in '60 together, so he had been in Congress for 16 years. Was running for re-election, had a tough campaign. Pardon me. And he promised, Bob Dole had promised him that he'd try to come make an appearance for him if he could. So set up a breakfast in Wichita. So I had an early, I don't know what time they left Houston, but got into Wichita for a breakfast meeting. And then flew to Topeka. And I think they did a few press events and things for Garner Shriver while they were down in Wichita. It was mid-morning late morning maybe perhaps before they left Wichita. Arrived at the former Forbes Field, or was it still Forbes Field then?
Yep, Forbes Air Force Base.
And the motorcade was planned over here to come to the KU Oklahoma football game. And I remember all of the, I was helping arrange the motorcade, and I knew that the highway, we didn't know exactly what route, they wouldn't disclose exactly what route would be taken. But we knew that all of the overpasses on the turnpike between Topeka and Lawrence had been secured. They were all staffed with law enforcement. And I thought it was a certainty that we would take the turnpike. So our motorcade starts rolling away from the plane. We get out to Highway 75, and we make a left. So we're going south out of Topeka, and 45th Street Road, I haven't driven these roads for years and years and years, but there used to be a nice blacktop road between here and the south edge of Topeka. We got on that 45th Street Road. I don't know if we made better time or not. I kind of doubt it. Hills, turns, you name it. Two lane. We was just down the middle of the highway. There were law enforcement with sirens and lights up front, but so people would clear off the road. But we were running late. He got into Topeka late. And the ball game doesn't wait for anybody. We were gunning it to get over here to Lawrence. We come into Lawrence. We got the turnpike, and of course they cleared the streets. All the intersections were blocked, and the streets were cleared. The particular path we were taking from the West Turnpike exit to the stadium. But it scared me to death. We were driving through those Lawrence streets, and the game day traffic, I mean, there were people parked bumper to bumper, both sides of those narrow streets. We were gunning down the center. We had this big, long motorcade with some big vehicles, ambulance and everything, and doing really, really ridiculous speeds. But Bob Dole wanted to get there in time. And we were driving still at a fairly high rate of speed into the stadium, under the West Stadium, screeched to a halt at 1:30, or whatever the designated time was. Door to the limousine opens, Dole's out, walking as fast as he can, onto the field, flipped the coin, and the game started. But the day was just getting started.
I'm going to stop you, Bob, because we got to take some questions.
All right. Well, let's do that then.
More to the story.
Had a full activity, full schedule the rest of the day, unbelievable, and that was his day off.
That was great. Thank you all. So thank you, panelists, for sharing with us. It's been so fun talking with you. We're going to open up the floor to questions or comments, recollections, anything you like. We have a few minutes left before we get going this evening. Anyone want to share?
I might help getting it started, and I realize it sounds self-serving, but the lady back here in the yellow coat has a great story from the Clinton inauguration. I think would be worth sharing, because it ties right into what Liz said about how gracious a Kansan Bob Dole really was.
Yes, I'm Barbara Wood, and I was invited to the Clinton inauguration by the Clintons, but somehow Bob Dole found out I was going to be in Washington and invited me to breakfast in his office. So I walk into breakfast in his office, and he goes, "Hi, Barbara, call your mother." I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Just pick up this phone and call your mother." So I picked up the phone and called my mother, and she goes, "What?" And I said, "Well, I'm in Bob Dole's office." And he said, "Call your mother." And he had such a way of connecting with anybody. My mother, myself, the world.
Anybody else?
Got one back here.
Christina back here.
Hi, I'm Kay Breda and my husband Don. We both graduated from here, and I was a poli-sci major, and how I wish we had the Dole Center. Don is a physician, and for maybe 30 years, we have been lobbyists in DC for American Medical Association. Don's a psychiatrist, so also for the American Psychiatric Association. When Bob Dole was president of the Senate, he had a beautiful office, and we would go in, and I don't think it made any difference that we were from Kansas, but maybe it did. And we would have maybe 10 or 15 minutes with his fabulous assistant, Sheila Burke, who was just wonderful and knew everything that we were going to talk about and everything. And then there'd be a knock on the door, and in would come Bob Dole. "Hi, Don. Hi, Kay. How are things in Wichita? Now, I'm going to be there next week because the hospital is going to open a new wing, and will you be there?" And then sit and talk with us for maybe 10, 15 minutes, asking our opinion, not giving his, but asking our opinion, and then exit. Now, we still continue to do these lobbying things in Washington. No way is anything like that anymore. Even though many of the people that are there now are friends of ours, he just had such a flair, such a wonderful thing. And then when we were in Wichita and he came in, "Hi, Kay, hi, Don." He was amazing.
Well, if I can just add something personal to that. My mother used to come and visit me from Chicago, and I'd say, you know, I'm really sorry, but, well, do you mind going? We're going to a town meeting, and Congressman Dole is going to be speaking. Oh, no, she said, we'll go along. So she did this 2 or 3 times, and October of 1978, she passed away, and I went to my sister's in North Carolina for Thanksgiving, and I was going home, and I was in the airport, and there came the senator and Elizabeth Dole racing down the hallway. And I said, Senator, Elizabeth, when are you moving back to Kansas? But the crux of the thing was the fact that he said, and how is your mother, whom he'd only met 2 or 3 times? And I said she had passed away in October. And a week later, and remember, I was not a constituent of his, a week later I received a lovely note saying that he was so sorry to hear about my mother's passing. So those are things that you just don't forget. You just don't forget.
A few more minutes. Anybody else want to share? Have any comments before we wrap up?
Or questions?
Yeah, questions?
Question for Bob. Are you still in contact, or when's the last time you talked to the senator?
I left his staff in '77 and have not seen him often since. We occasionally have crossed paths, but not on a regular basis. And the last conversation, I was intrigued with this reference to his office while he was majority leader of the Senate, his Capitol office being rather very, very nice quarters in the historic section of the Capitol building. It was 20 years ago, or 19 years ago. I was back there in '95, hadn't been there for a while, and I was doing some volunteer advocacy for a major nonprofit health organization. And I was back as a volunteer leader, and I stopped in, not to discuss that issue with him, but just to say hello. And that was the last time we had much of a visit. I didn't expect to see him. I stopped over at the Senate office, actually. I asked for 2 or 3 people I thought would still be there, but they were all retired and gone. And finally someone said, well, do you remember Ruth Ann? And I did, of course, but Ruth Ann Comark was someone who had been just a back office staffer, but had been there for 35 years, a very dedicated, loyal Dole person. In fact, at that time, she was the keeper of Leader the dog, who slept under her desk.
Yep.
I had not met Leader before, but I met Leader that day and had a nice visit with Ruth Ann, and I said, well, I hadn't expected to see the senator, I just wanted to stop by the Senate office, and she said, oh, he'd like to see you. I know he'd like to see you. So she called over to the Capitol building and said, oh yeah, bring him over. So she escorted me over there down to the subway and all, and we went over there and had a nice chance to see him and tour the office, which I remembered as Everett McKinley Dirkson's office from 1963, because as a young Kansan back there working for Bob Dole, he had invited me to go along when they used to have, when Everett Dirkson was Republican leader of the Senate and Charlie Halleck was Republican leader of the House. Every Friday they would have a news conference called the Evan Charlie Show, or it was dubbed as that. And they were going to be speaking on an ag topic that particular week. It was in August of '63, and they wanted to check signals with Bob Dole on something before they had this national news meeting. And so Dole was scurrying over there. So he grabbed me to take me along. I had no particular reason to be there, but I had the pleasure of meeting those gentlemen and seeing the office of the Senate Majority Leader. Actually, the Senate Minority Leader at that time, they've since reversed. They used to switch the majority and minority. Every time it changed parties, they would switch offices. And I think it was under Howard Baker several years back that they changed to where the Republican leader always has the same office, whether they're in the majority or the minority. But at any rate, just another example of him involving people, being considerate of the lowest on the staff, and it was a very memorable experience. But I recalled the chandeliers and the mantel pieces and so forth in that office where Everett McKinley Dirkson had held sway in 1963, and I said, this kind of reminds me of Everett Dirkson's office. And he said, it is. And that's where the Republicans stay nowadays, when whoever is leader of the Senate.
Anybody else? Yes.
If I may. I'm Lee Cross. I'm from Overland Park, and I grew up here in Lawrence, and I'm a friend of Larry's, actually. But I want to share one quick story. My father-in-law and my wife's family are from Hutchinson, and her mother's family from western Kansas were very close to Bob, and I believe her grandfather grew up with Bob and Russell. But my father-in-law is actually a big Democrat and worked at the Hutchinson Clinic, and always tells the story about how Bob Dole himself called one day in the mid-90s and got my father-in-law, who was an administrator at the Hutch Clinic. And I don't know if anybody in the staff wouldn't make the call, or if Bob Dole knew that the impact of that phone call would be significant enough that people would talk about it. And sure enough, my father-in-law still talks about it. And the senator wanted to put on a display, I believe, for ED, for erectile dysfunction. And he knew how much he knew his people and how to influence them and impact them, I think was significant. He knew at the state fair that that would be a great way, in my knowledge and memory 20 years ago, to get that message out. And then one other quick comment, having numerous friends who have disabilities, I think his work for the American Disabilities Act was significant, and I think an example of what somebody mentioned earlier about working on principle but compromising sensibly to get things done. I just want to thank you all for your work for him, and I certainly was a beneficiary of a number of things that he promoted, so thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
We know there's stories out there.
Yeah, you got stories. Yeah, if you don't feel like sharing and are interested in sharing stories about your experience with the senator or recollections, don't hesitate to contact me or any of our archivists on staff. Our contact information is on the Dole Institute website. We're so pleased to have you here. I hope you had a chance to look at some things from our collections out there in the hall before you came in. I think they should still be out there on your way out. And yes, Bob.
I was going to follow up on this spontaneous contact by the senator personally from Washington to someone out in Kansas to chat about something. And I think Bob Dole was widely known for that. And he would pick up the phone and call somebody. He'd come across a note or something, and often not the most obvious person, but maybe in some cases a less obvious person. I recall numerous campaign workers who became very dedicated to Bob Dole and worked very, very hard as volunteers in his various campaigns, who were sold on him because of the fact they had received a phone call from him or a note from him, but oftentimes a phone call that he might just come across a letter. He might be walking through the office and see a letter to him from someone out in the field that some staffer was working on a response, drafting a response or something. He would see that and say, what's that? And then I'm going to call that person. And he would call and he would engage him in conversation. I recall some campaign workers. I recall one young man who was called at work at a grocery store. He was working in produce. But he got a call from Bob Dole, Senator Bob Dole. He was high school age. And he became one of our best campaign workers ever. And another county chairman I know in our, I forget which year it was, one of our Senate campaigns, who wrote him a letter of complaint, to the exact opposite, and I think it was on Vietnam, which was not an easy issue. But this was a negative letter that he saw that and he wanted to talk to that person and reason with that person to see his point of view, perhaps. And he just picked up the phone and called them out of the blue. And this wasn't a real important person in that community necessarily, but they had evidently had, didn't hear any of the conversation, but apparently that person became so dedicated to Bob Dole, he not only went over to his point of view on that issue, but became his campaign chairman in that county and worked diligently for him in the subsequent campaigns. So it's been a very effective technique for him, but it's something that's very spontaneous. And I can cite other examples, but I know we're limited in time. If we're preparing to close, I just want to acknowledge all that the Dole Institute is doing here for Bob Dole's legacy. And for having this meeting, this session this evening. I think it's wonderful that you all are sponsoring this and that everybody came to share some of these anecdotes and experiences. And I just think it's a wonderful thing, and I've been very inspired by the staff, or impressed by the staff here today. They have an excellent group of people working to perpetuate these materials, this information, and that legacy.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to share the evening with you all. We know, evenings your time is valuable, and we're glad you spent it with us. We hope to see you again at the Institute at a program, and don't hesitate to chat. Come by, visit our exhibit hall, or learn more about the archive. So thanks so much.
I'm going to make a real quick pitch for something else. I've seen many of your faces at events. The Alumni Association also sponsors something that we call Explore KU. You've probably gotten emails on them, and a number of you I know have attended them. But we try and do a behind-the-scenes look at different places around campus. And in fact, a couple of years ago, we did one here where we took people down really behind the scenes, and we've been to numerous buildings around campus. These come along 3 times, 4 times, sometimes a year. If you'll watch for those, please join us. We'll take you places you normally walk in the front door. We'll take you behind the scenes. And it's a great way to learn about KU and all that it has to offer. So watch for those emails on Explore KU and join us, please.
Thank you.
All right.